Then we've got 5 questions and 2 minutes per question. I am Gary Smith, GMB Scotland Secretary. Welcome to everybody joining us tonight for the Hustings on Care, and I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing this Hustings meeting. I don't think there is anything more important that confronts us in Scotland and indeed across the whole of the UK than dealing with and facing up to the issues that we've had to confront with care as we've gone through the pandemic, but also it's a massive challenge for us as we move forward as a society, how we are going to fund care, and of course about how we value care workers. We've got a panel from the different political parties in Scotland who I'll introduce in a minute, and we'll have a number of questions from our members in care this evening as well. GMB Scotland has been at the forefront of the campaigns around care as we've gone through the pandemic, and indeed before the pandemic started, be it on equal pay. But as we've gone into the pandemic, we've been dealing with issues around PPE, with safe systems of work. We fought to get the social care, the support fund for social care staff established so that the care workers could afford to go off sick. And of course, we have been fighting over the £500 payment that some carers have received, and very much and unapologetically, we are now campaigning very hard on the issue of wages for carers and the fight for 15. I am very pleased tonight that we will be joined, or that we are joined with Jeremy Balfour from the Scottish Conservatives, Robert Leslie from the SNP, Robert's joining us from Orkney, Jackie Baillie, Scottish Labour in Dumbarton, John Waddell from the Lib Dems, who's in West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, and Alison Johnstone from the Scottish Greens. And by way of introduction, we're going to ask each of the panellists to speak for a couple of minutes about social care and their party's views on social care. And then, as I say, we will take a number of questions from our members who work in the care sector. So if it's okay, I would ask Jeremy, for yourself, maybe to lead off, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you, Gary, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for coming along this evening. And most of all, thank you for all that you have done, not only in the last 18 months, but what you do in day out and day in. Your work goes often unnoticed, sadly sometimes unappreciated, but I know the effort you have put in regard to what you have done. I myself benefit from a carer coming in every morning to help me, and without that carer, my day would be a lot more difficult, if not impossible. So thank you, first of all. Clearly, we have come through a really difficult 18 months, and there are lessons that we need to learn. And one of the things that we are committed to as the Scottish Conservative Party is to make sure that there is a full inquiry to find out the lessons we can learn, but not just the lessons we can learn, but what can we do differently going forward. Too often, these things are brushed under a carpet. What happened in the care homes, what happened to individual people in regard to having the right equipment, and we need to learn these lessons. We've obviously had a commission in regard to health and social care, which was released just before the election. Broadly, we are in favour of what is in that report, but the danger is it becomes a centralised service, and that cannot work. It hasn't worked for Police Scotland, and so what we need is national standards, national targets. So whether you live in Stornoway or Stirling, whether you live in Dumfries or Dundee, you are guaranteed the same care. But, and this is the key but, it must have a local dimension to it so that individuals who are working on the ground know what they can do. So I look forward to hearing your questions, answering your questions, and having a dialogue over the next wee while together. But thank you again for tonight, and thank you for all that you've done in the last 14 and 15 months.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And if we could go over to Orkney and Robert, if you could give us a couple of minutes introductory position on the SNP's position on care, please, Robert.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I'll just echo Jeremy's words there of appreciation for everything that folk in the care sector have done over this past year and more. I was very aware at the start of the pandemic and the lockdown situation here in Orkney that the folk working in that sector here were under a great deal of stress, and that I had to send some messages through Marie Todd, who I was working for at the time, just to voice concerns about PPE and also about staff lacking awareness around social distancing and so on in the workplace and so on. And a lot of these things had to be addressed very quickly. So I appreciate that folk were transforming the way they worked at that stage. So the geographical area that I live in also makes care delivery, the delivery of care packages challenging with island to island transport. So I certainly would echo again Jeremy's words on the fact that they can't be centralised. Okay, if we're going to have a national care service, it has to be flexible and not a one-size-fits-all policy at all. And obviously, we're recognising as a party, the importance of the work that's been done, and I think the establishment of a national care service and a national wage for care staff reflects that, and I look forward to seeing that come into fruition when I hopefully join other party colleagues in Holyrood in May sometime.
Thank you very much, Robert, for those introductory remarks. Very interesting that you touched upon not only the National Care Service, but a national wage for carers, because obviously at the moment we've got huge discrepancies in wages between public and private sector, and even within the public sector, different councils. The NHS supplies home care, for instance, in Highlands. So really, really interesting point. And just before I bring Jackie Baillie in, remember you can post questions or points or comments. Please fire them up, and if we get a chance, of course, I will read some of those out. Jackie, if you could give us a couple of minutes, that would be great. Jackie, you're on mute. Now you've turned your camera off. It's the story of lockdown. There you go. We're live.
I know. This is going so well. I think you did it to me deliberately, Gary. But I was saying, can I very much welcome the opportunity to speak at this Hustings, and I'm very proud to do so as a member of the GMB. I think there is a real opportunity ahead of us to change the nature of social care, but we need to do that quickly and not let this opportunity slip us by. Can I start by echoing the thanks that others have done? I watched friends and neighbours go out each and every day. You were at the front line of the pandemic, and to be honest, I couldn't do what you did because you kept people safe despite the challenges that you faced. Because I know, again, from constituents and friends, and they were telling me that there was a lack of PPE at the start. The PPE that you had was poor quality. There was a shortage of it. There was a lack of guidance from the Scottish Government. Indeed, there was a lack of support from the Care Inspectorate. They stepped back instead of stepping forward. And there was a lack of recognition that actually it wasn't just care provided in care homes that was an issue. It was people like yourselves going into people's homes, providing that very valuable care at home that was simply not dealt with appropriately. We all clapped on a Thursday. I did it too, for health and social care workers. But you don't just deserve our praise. We believe fundamentally that you deserve a raise for what you've been doing. And if we don't do it now, when on earth are we going to do this? And it is for me about changing things. It's a predominantly female workforce. It's predominantly low paid. The terms and conditions aren't great. We need to value what you do, and now is the time to do it. So Labour, at the centre of their budget ask, said we wanted £15 an hour by the end of this next Parliament, but an immediate rise of £12 an hour. Unfortunately, the government didn't listen, and on average, what you've got is about 20 pence a week of a rise, which frankly I find insulting given what you've been through. So we will make that a priority in the next Parliament, and you have my absolute pledge on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party that we will work with the GMB to make Fight for 15 a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Powerful words. Do appreciate what you did around the budget, and very unambiguous on pay. I look forward to hearing what the other panellists have to say on that as we go through. Next up is John from the Lib Dems. Welcome, John. And if you could give us a couple of minutes, that would be great. Remember and post any questions or points, folks. I will try and get to them. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Gary, and thank you everyone for being here. I think if the pandemic has shown us anything, it's the mountain of a challenge that is facing social care in Scotland and the UK, and has highlighted the too often unseen and unpaid work of carers. So like everyone, I'd like to thank everyone in the social care sector for what they've done over the last year. The Scottish Liberal Democrats believe there should be a step change in social care so that it is guaranteed for everyone and considered a normal part of life, and it merits investment to allow people to achieve their goals and secure well-being. We support an enhanced carer allowance in Scotland and are campaigning for a UK-wide uplift of £1,000 per year to recognise the value of carers. We will create national standards to support better care services and reward care workers with national pay bargaining and a career ladder that boosts their skills and pay at every step. At the heart of our plans in this election is bounce back support for education and increased mental health support, two things that are as important, if not more so, for the social care sector than anywhere else. The Scottish Health Survey analysis of mental well-being among carers showed that mental health well-being decreases as hours of care increase, a clear link which shows that this must be a priority in mental health support. There are an estimated 29,000 young carers in Scotland, 4% of the under 16 population. It's been hard for young people to balance their education with looking after loved ones during the pandemic, and our education bounce back plan is designed to make every hour spent learning in school count for more. We will also make it easier financially for carers to access education and training. Our plans recognise that social and emotional development is just as important as and essential to academic development. In Scotland, we need to put recovery first for mental health, education, and for carers. We will make it easier financially for carers to access education, and that mental health support that's necessary in Scotland is available to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Some really interesting comments, pay bargaining, national pay bargaining, and about recognising, and I think reward for skills, big agenda now coming through both in the public and private sector. So thank you for that, John. Alison, last at this section, but definitely by no means least, Alison from the Scottish Greens.
Thank you very much indeed, and I too am delighted to take part in this evening's GMB Hustings, and I'll kick off by just pledging my wholehearted support for your £15 Holyrood candidates pledge. The Scottish Green Party manifesto notes that we want to see those working in care paid at least £15 an hour. It's fair to say that care for too long has been undervalued, underappreciated. We've just taken it for granted. And until the pandemic came along and shone a very bright light on the incredible work that goes on in our communities, you know, I'm not convinced that would have changed. And I think it's absolutely right that we grab this opportunity and that we ensure that care becomes and is recognised as the incredible career that it is. But if we want to make that the case, and if we want to continue to recruit and retain people in this most vital of professions, then we've got to put in place proper training and proper pay. Because to be honest, when you consider that you could earn the same sum for a far less demanding and emotionally traumatizing at times work, I mean, it's simply not good enough. It's also very, very gendered. And the frustrating thing is as well, if we invest in care, some of our leading economists are saying we could massively boost the economy while increasing people's cohesion and improving our national health at the same time. So we want to see a national care service built on human rights. We want to end competitive tendering. And if we're talking about dignity and respect, we have to make sure that those working in the sector enjoy that too. We want to ensure that the paying conditions of carers reflect their expertise and their experience. I mean, I know for a fact that I would find this job simply beyond me. We also want to introduce mandatory training in palliative care for all of those working on the front line. But I think it's fair to say that our health and care workers need time to heal, to recover from the trauma of the pandemic. So it's really important that we have a recruitment drive on at this time. And it's really important that we do all we can to retain people. We don't want you to leave. We know how valuable you are. So that is about making sure that you've got flexible access to the best of healthcare yourselves. And we want all those who've worked in care to be able to access any mental health support and counselling that you might need. And we believe that everyone has the right to a safe workplace. So we want to see the creation of a national occupational health body based within NHS Scotland. I'm probably gone way over my time, so I'll stop there, but I really look forward to this evening's discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. Really good contribution as well. Gender, talking about training, human rights in care, and a very, very powerful recognition about the trauma many of our members have gone through and are going through. Without further ado, I am going to go seamlessly, I hope, to question 1 from Jackie Mcneil. Jackie works in local government home care. We will have a different order responding, and Robert, I'll ask you to come back on Jackie's question first. Jackie, great to see you.
Hi there. Right. My question would be, I believe workers in the care sector have been exploited for a long time, and it's time those that dedicate their lives to caring for other people's loved ones are recognised and rewarded with a pay rise. I am part of the Fight for 15, a campaign for a £15 an hour minimum wage for carers and pay rises for all workers in the social care sector. Do you support our campaign?
Really, no wriggle room on that one.
No.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Robert, you.
Yeah, I must admit I've no signed up to that yet, but I'll probably go away and do that after this. I know that in this financial year, the Scottish Government provided an additional 8.8 million, so that was to deliver the real living wage commitment to ensure at least £9.30 per hour for social care staff. So that's a start. And then, as I mentioned before, there are other plans for the national wage for care staff. But certainly, as far as the £15 campaign, the person that would be able to deal with that, Kate Forbes, she was a first-time speaker with me at the S&P conference in 2015. So I know her quite well. She's had a slightly accelerated career path compared to me, but I'm sure that I could drop her a line and see if it was safe for me to be signing up for that £15 campaign, and that would give us a good indication of where we're going to be in the coming Parliament. But I certainly feel that there's a strong case for greater recognition, and I think that's reflected in the plans for a national care service and for that national wage for care staff, because I know that, for instance, in Orkney here, there's a lot of downtime between the work. As I said, island to island travel and fairly long car journeys. and sometimes they're only travelling to see one, one person on an island because of situations, and folk can be spending a lot longer away from home and being unpaid than paid through this. So I think we need to really look at that and reflect the valuable service that these folk are given.
Thank you very much, Robert. Jackie, and then I'll ask John after Jackie.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, Jackie, for your question. Can I just get a bit frustrated and angry? Because to answer your question directly, yes, we absolutely in Scottish Labour support the fight for 15. As I said earlier, we put this at the very centre of our budget ask before Parliament broke up. And I am delighted to see suddenly everybody's supporting it. But I have to tell you, the facts are the Conservatives didn't vote for it. The Greens certainly didn't vote for it. In fact, they voted against it. And so did the SNP. So I welcome all converts now. But let's be honest here, they had an opportunity to do it and they singularly failed. So I'm delighted everybody's now saying that it's in their manifesto and they're going to deliver it. I will certainly be holding them to all the promises they've made on this call, because at the end of the day, you have been undervalued for too long. You've been exploited for too long. If we're not going to do this now, when are we going to do this? And I think it's high time that we actually make sure that social care workers across Scotland are valued and respected. And the traditional way of doing it is to make sure you're paid well and appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jackie. John, then it'll be Alison after John, and Jeremy finally.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Jackie, for that question. I agree wholeheartedly that the social care sector has been exploited and underpaid for too long, and that's why we want to put a human rights approach at the core of how we approach social care in future, and why we support national collective bargaining in terms of finding fair pay for those workers. In terms of the exact figure that we want to see care workers paid, we're not there yet. We think deciding a figure would preempt those collective bargaining talks, but we're certainly not principally against £15. But we think if we're to go hard on national collective bargaining and have those talks, then we need to decide the figure in that conversation. And that's the approach that the Scottish Liberal Democrats want to take when we're trying to approach fair pay.
Thank you very much, John. Alison?
Yes, just pleased to confirm again, the Scottish Greens manifesto has a commitment in it to at least £15 an hour for those working in care. Jackie Baillie alluded to the budget negotiations in which the Scottish Greens negotiated for £100 million uplift to public sector pay, progress of which I'm very proud, but very hopeful that we will be able to push further and faster if we work collectively together in this next session of the Scottish Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. And Jeremy, last in this session.
I mean, thanks, Gary. We haven't set a figure. A wee bit like we said previously, we want this to be negotiated, and we didn't vote for the Scottish Government budget. We didn't vote for the Labour budget, and our budget wasn't accepted either. I think this issue is bigger. I mean, obviously, the pay that you get now is very key, but we also have to look at regard to the contracts that many people are on in regard to downtime. So again, I know that my carer has to sit for half an hour non-paid when she leaves me before she goes to the next person. We have to look at the issue of cancellation. When people cancel, the company or the authority will keep that money, but does it get passed on to the staff? So I think absolutely we need to look at how much people pay. That's clearly very important. But in any renegotiation, I think we have to look at the whole issue of terms and conditions as well, because I'm becoming more and more aware that these are issues for people who I'm dealing with on a daily basis.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I mean, just a couple of interesting stats for people. I think the national care contract has only risen by 3% this year. I think that's where it has arrived at. When you think about all the challenges around COVID, about the increasing complexity of the care needs of care users, that is not a lot of money at all. And there's going to be a fundamental issue about any national care service will be about levels of funding. Could I remind everybody that £15 an hour is the average wage? You know, and are we really saying that people in care who've done such an exceptional job are somehow worth less than average? But in terms of the economic madness in care, we are looking at 50% staff turnover in some areas of care, and that's after an employer has got through all the difficulties of getting people employed in the first place. That just does not make economic sense, because we're paying a fortune to try and have to get agency labour to cover, and of course there's massive costs associated with that level of recruitment turnover as well. Next question is from Steve Fawns, who works in private care, and Jackie, followed by John, just to give everybody a wee bit of advance notice. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, good evening. What should be done to support carers affected by the pandemic with psychological support? At present, an helpline and a website just doesn't cut it. Many carers are suffering from PTSD and can't afford to take time off work, as we only get statutory sick pay. What will you do to support the mental health of frontline workers?
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Steve. We have set out in our manifesto very clear plans about what we want to do to address the mental health of the workforce, because you're absolutely right. People who are on the front line of the pandemic in care homes, and indeed our NHS staff, have really, really struggled. Some, are showing symptoms of PTSD, and we know already that mental health waiting times are just extraordinary. You know, there are children, adults waiting a year to get access to mental health services. We have to start by ensuring that the workforce that we need to take care of us are themselves taken care of. So that's basic things like making sure there's access to decent breaks, there's access to rest areas, there's access to, hot food. All of these things, whether it's in a hospital or a care home, need to be dealt with. But we need to also provide counselling and advice services, mental health services, directly to the workforce. So we would set up specific initiatives to ensure that that happened, not just in hospitals, but in care homes, in private care homes, and actually for the staff who are going into people's homes as well, because it's not just care homes that people have been on the front line of the pandemic, it's care at home staff as well. So across the board, we need to support those who are caring for us, and we need to care for them too.
Thank you, Jackie. Next up is John, followed by Alison, then Robert.
Thank you for that question, Stephen. I think mental health is important in every sector, but I think it probably can't be stressed enough how important it is to carers who put other people's importance above their own in so many cases. But we have to recognise that there was a mental health crisis in Scotland even before the pandemic hit. And only now, in the same way that we've had a great big light shone on the work that carers do, people are starting to understand the importance of mental health themselves. And we have to take that for, while the terrible circumstances that we're in, the opportunity that it is to show how important mental health is to people, and in particular those in work and social care. So one of the things that we do in particular is that we want to expand the number of counsellors to cut mental health weights, which should hopefully benefit everyone. But we also want to create better working conditions for carers, and that'll have an enormous impact on people and their mental health. And we have to recognise as well, in the conversation we were just having about pay and fair pay, the stress and anxiety that's caused by being underpaid has an enormous impact on your mental health as well. So when we're talking about fair pay, we're also talking about fair work conditions and the contract terms of contract and employment. So we have to make sure that when we're having collective bargaining talks, and when we're talking about mental health, and when we're talking about carers, all of those things are connected. So we need to improve the mental health system as a whole, so that everyone across Scotland can benefit from it. But when we're having that conversation, we also need to recognise that there's people disproportionately affected by that, and that when we're talking about contracts of employment, that affects people's mental health as well. And those are all things right at the heart of our plans for the next Parliament.
Thank you very much, John. Sorry, it's Alison next, and then I got that wrong. Jeremy, you'll be after Alison, then Robert finally. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Steve. It's a really important question. And, you know, I know carers during this pandemic will have seen things that they just can't unsee, and they'll have experienced things that will remain with them well into the future. So we have a manifesto commitment to ensure that all those working in care have dedicated access to the mental health support and counselling that they might need. We also want to see better mental health support in our communities. We want GP appointments extended to 15 minutes. May not be long enough in every situation, but it's a step in the right direction. We also want mental health clinicians in every GP surgery, and a no wrong door policy. If you reach out for that help, it's got to be available. We also want better terms and conditions for those working in care, and that is access to good food during your working day, time to, you know, hydrate properly. You absolutely must have a break, and if you don't, then you should be paid overtime for the time that you're compelled to work over. But I personally don't think that's the answer. We want your work to be sustainable and something that you continue to want to do. And as I've said, we want an NHS occupational health service where employers and staff and trade unions can get together and ensure that we're doing everything we can in a preventative way to protect our staff and make sure that they enjoy good health across their own lifespans. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? If we want people to look after us, we have to be looking after them. And the last thing we can afford to do at this point in time is lose all the experience and expertise that is in this skilled workforce. So I think paying conditions are at the absolute heart of this, as well as access to the very best mental health support.
Thank you very much, Alison. Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. I think it's one of the key questions that the Parliament and government are going to have to face in the next few years, because I think one of the lasting legacies of the last 14 months is going to be the mental health issues that will come and are already there. And that's why we need to fund mental health services, both for adults and for children, more appropriately. And we, as a party, have committed to put more money into that. And the reason for that is because at the moment, if you break your leg on the way to work, you will be taken in an ambulance and you will have your leg probably fixed that day in a hospital. If you've got a mental health issue, you will join a waiting list and you'll be lucky to see someone within months, and proper treatment can take years to follow. And I think that is just unacceptable in the 21st century of Scotland. So we need to fund these services, and we need to make sure that people can access these services appropriately. And that means not having the stigma behind these mental health issues. Again, I think as a society, we recognise physical disability, but we are much more hesitant when we're talking about hidden disabilities. And I think we need to be much more open, and that means giving people time and space and appropriate help when required. So I think this has to be a priority for the Parliament going forward.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And finally, Robert. Robert, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was noting everybody else's comments there, and just the fact that the Scottish Government had made an additional, I think, £500,000 available to health boards to provide dedicated mental health support for health and social care staff during the pandemic. And I think that the 15 million extra to be able to support continued establishment of local mental health services that came out of the budget will be important. And the increase that was announced in the budget takes the mental health spending to over 1.1 billion in total. So we're making inroads, but I was disappointed to hear when I was speaking to one of the community link practitioners in Orkney, of whom there are 2 as a pilot at the moment linked to GP practices, that there are probably at a point when it's correctly been said that the mental health crisis that we've been talking about existed pre-pandemic. And one of the last public meetings I went to was to try and find a way forward after a local charity here collapsed that had a number of councillors employed very busily at the time. And we've got 15 councillors just within Orkney here that are either not being employed at all or are significantly underemployed due to lack of funding. So I would be keen to investigate how we secure extra funding to make sure that these services are up to strength again, whether that's in the third sector or the statutory sector, because at the moment there's a wide variety of need in Orkney that's quite quite clearly been heightened by the pandemic situation, just through lockdown and folks' anxiety. So whether you're in the care sector or been furloughed for a long period of time, the mental health needs are there to be addressed.
Thank you very much, Robert. Very conscious of time, clashing with the leaders' debate. I want to introduce one of the magnificent women leaders from the Glasgow Women's Strike. Shona Thomson has got the next question.
Hi, good evening. Throughout this pandemic, care workers have had to fight tooth and nail to be heard. And at every turn, we were ignored by those at the top, government ministers to employers. We were ignored when it came to PPE, sick pay, and regular testing. And we were shamed for calling out the hospital transfers into care homes. We've had to go to the media to get a hearing. We should have never been put into that position. And I pay tribute to all care workers like me who have spoke out. Can I ask, did you speak to any care workers during this pandemic? And why do you think our voices fell on deaf ears? And what would you do differently?
Thank you, Shona. Powerful question. Jeremy, followed by Alison.
Firstly, thank you for your question. And yeah, Gary's absolutely right. Really powerful question. To answer your question, firstly, yes, I did meet as an MSP with quite a number of carers over particularly last summer and also in the autumn of this year. And I had quite a lot of conversations with them, and at a local level was able to get in touch with care homes. I think me and my staff phoned every care home in Lothian and had a conversation in regard to that. Clearly, you weren't heard. And if I'm honest, I think the answer to that is because government and society don't appreciate you enough. Partly, as I think Jackie said, because of you being in a predominantly women workforce. I think if it had been men, it would have been different. And I think that we have to challenge that and change that. Clearly, as I said in my opening statement, we need an inquiry. You did stand out. You did say that people shouldn't believe in hospital to go into care homes, and that is a legacy that we will need to own up to, particularly Scottish Government will have to own up to and apologise for and learn from. So I think all those things are lessons that we need to learn. I think you deserve collectively an apology, and we then need to not just apologise and give you words, but we need to then follow that up with action.
Thank you very much. It'll be Alison followed by Robert.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shona, for all that you've done and for your extremely important question this evening. I did meet with carers and with care organisations during the pandemic when it first kicked off, because I had an opportunity to speak with consultants on COVID wards, with a consultant in A&E in hospital, and with virologists. One of the things that the Scottish Greens and I did on the 24th of April, off the top of my head, last year, not long after the pandemic had hit us, I wrote to the Scottish Government and I asked them to introduce testing for all health and care staff, because I'd heard at that point about the danger of asymptomatic testing, that people who showed no symptoms whatsoever or only very mild symptoms could be contagious and could be carrying the virus anywhere. So I think that had a huge impact. It felt for me like it took forever to get that message across, and for the government to introduce that. So that was a huge frustration. Why were you not listened to? Well, I think for too long it's obvious that the care sector it's not been listened to, or we wouldn't be having a conversation just now about a £15 per hour pay rise as if that was a big deal. And I think you can tell a lot about society, can't you, from how much it pays for certain services. I mean, Boris Johnson has said that he's offering nurses down south a 1% pay rise, but he's talking about increasing nuclear warheads by some degree. I think too, I took part in a poverty hustings last week, and Dr. Angela O'Hagan spoke. And it's interesting to me as a social security and health spokesperson, the links between poverty and care. But Dr. Angela O'Hagan made the point that if we invested as much in care as we do in construction, for example, the returns to the economy would be even bigger. So we've got to stop thinking about this as a cost. We've got to start thinking about it as an investment. We've got to close the gender pay gap, and we've got to make sure that women like yourself, Shona, are listened to front and centre, because you do know what you're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Robert, John, then Jackie.
Yeah, thanks very much. I can only agree with that comment about investment in care rather than construction, coming from a council area where I think the focus on people has been lost over the heads of infrastructure and things like that. If it's made of metal or rock, it seems to be much more exciting than the people that are going to rebuild this economy. My oldest daughter's actually classed as a care worker. She works for Women's Aid in Orkney, and she'll be getting the £500 payment, and having watched her work from her bedroom, basically, often supporting women that were fleeing domestic abuse during the pandemic, which was on the increase, obviously, during the period. I can only say that she's worth every penny of it, because these were often, really traumatic events that she was having to deal with. She had only started the job a couple of months before lockdown, and hardly knew her fellow workers or her boss very well to go through that. So luckily, her mother, my wife, who lives in the same house and works for rape crisis, so she was able to give her some support. Orkney's a small place, and I also spoke to care workers directly because they knew that I was working for Marie Todd, who I think I referred to earlier. There were concerns around PPE and then social distancing in the workplace. There were concerns around some care workers who were maybe not taking that seriously, and heading off to get snacks in the same car and things like that, and coming back to work. And Marie intervened directly, speaking to first of all the council leader, and then I think also the care home manager, just to impress the need to adhere to the rules and to take everything seriously. So yeah, probably because it's a small community and we know one another, these issues were being flagged up to me, and I'd like to think that to some small extent I was able to help in that situation.
Thank you, Robert. John?
Thank you very much for that incredibly powerful statement and question, Shona. I can say that in the last year I have spoke to care workers. In September last year, I was phoning hundreds of people for my parliamentary selection, and I spoke to a number of our members who are care workers and wanted to pass on to me their concerns. And quite frankly, no matter what the reason for not being listened to, and when they were raising concerns and trying to get them to MSPs and trying to get heard in Parliament, there's no good explanation for why those on the ground doing the work, putting themselves at risk, should not have been listened to and were left in the dire straits that they were. And I'm pleased that some of our MSPs have been listening and trying to raise them in Parliament, but why that never got through to government, I don't know. But I think the more important part of your question was that, what would we do differently in future? And I think if ever we're in such a crisis as this, but even in just normal times, we have to recognise that those who are on the ground doing the work know best about their sectors and their communities, and we have to listen to them at every possible opportunity. There should be never be a situation where the first question in Parliament or in government shouldn't be, how do we get in touch with those who know about these issues? Care workers in a pandemic is an extreme example, but a very pertinent one. And we should never allow that to happen again. So I think going forward, we have to make sure that there is actual deliberate attempts to get in touch with those who know the issues and that they are heard in Parliament. And rather than setting up talking shops, which has happened in the past, we actually have listening going on in Parliament with MSPs and with the government.
Thank you very much, John. Jackie?
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, Shona, for the question. It would be late February, early March last year that I was contacted by care home workers in this constituency, and I had regular dialogue with them. They didn't want to be named. They were very worried about repercussions. I spoke to them almost on a weekly basis about what was going on locally in their care homes and what they were being exposed to. And you're absolutely right. There was no PPE at the beginning. There was certainly no testing. Guidance coming from the Scottish Government was slow. And in fact, a lot of this pre-planning prior to the pandemic had been done, but never implemented. And that is a responsibility of government. So, all those things taken together made for a real problem with care homes being the epicenter of the pandemic. But I have to say, I'm not known for being shy. I think most elders on the call would agree with that. This was raised time and time again in Parliament. It was raised in written questions. It was raised orally with the government. It was raised in debates. It was raised by your trade union. The GMB never shut up about this. But I'm afraid the Scottish Government weren't listening. And that is the tragedy of this, that had they perhaps listened to those on the front line about what was really going on, instead of trying to say, no, that wasn't true, and defend the lack of PPE, I just found outrageous. And in future, we need to not just shout about it as we did, but to shout even louder and make sure that through the public inquiry, things like this are never, ever allowed to happen again. But the point you make is a valid one. We need to listen to people. They are telling us what's actually going on, and we need to reflect on that and act on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And just a few observations quickly from myself. Firstly, in March of last year, I wrote to the First Minister saying that we needed a plan for care, because it was obvious that the social care was on its knees, and the government knew this. Social care was on its knees going into the pandemic, and the pandemic just blew open all the problems we knew existed. Care workers were told that they didn't require the PPE they were requesting. And it was not about safety and safe systems of work. They were told they didn't require PPE because the PPE was not available. That was the truth of the matter. It wasn't risk-based, what care workers were being told. It was down to availability. And I think there was a fundamental dishonesty as we went through the early stages of the pandemic. And it was the voice of the workers, it was the workers themselves, it was their courage standing up on UK-wide TV and talking about problems with PPE. That was the game changer. Our members having the courage to stand up and be determined to have their voice heard. And let's not forget that in Glasgow, the home care staff, led by Shona and Francis, who we'll hear from in a minute, had to threaten strike action before we got testing. That must never, ever happen again. And certainly our union is not going to allow worker voice, independent trade union voice, to be watered down as we move into the debate over the National Care Service. We've got another fantastic question coming from Liz Martin, who works in private care. She's a brilliant GMB activist, and she's a nurse in private care. Great to see you, Liz.
Thank you all. Good evening. In the recent budget debate, it was clear that politicians simply didn't understand social care. Patrick Harvey, co-convener of the Scottish Greens, didn't appear to understand how the National Care Home contract operated. And Jean Freeman, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, has admitted that the Scottish Government failed by not understanding the social care sector well enough. £500 thank you payment and the fact that it hasn't reached most care workers and the fact that no care worker will see anywhere close to £500 is another example of government ministers failing to understand the reality of the sector. My question is it time for a Minister for Social Care, and preferably one that understands the system? Thank you.
It'll be Alison first. 3% is all that's been afforded, a 3% increase on the National Care Home contract, as I said earlier. And I want to re-emphasise this point. We knew care was in crisis because the Scottish Government had produced reports about problems in care, particularly with recruitment and retention. That we knew that before we went into this crisis. Alison, followed by Robert.
Yeah, thanks very much, Liz. With regards to the Minister for Social Care, I think it's certainly worth a look at, isn't it? Because we spoke for a long time about the lack of parity of esteem between physical and mental health. And now we have a Minister for Mental Health, somebody who has a portfolio that's purely focused on that. And I want to see parity of esteem between a national care service and a national health service. So I think this is well worth looking at. So yeah, I would be minded to suggest that that was a very good idea, so that we have someone who has, you know, their eye is on this ball and that is their main focus. And if we want to grow social care, and if we want it should be as highly regarded, of course, as our health service, but I don't think that's the case at the moment. It clearly isn't. We just have to look at the disparity. I think that would be a sensible direction to go in. You know, obviously, the Scottish Government has an impact on the National Care Home contract, and clearly 3% at the moment is totally insufficient. And I think what we're going to see, though, when we go back, those of us who are fortunate enough to be elected, you know, I'd like to think that all who return to Parliament in this next session are going to be champions for the care sector in their own regions, in their own constituencies, but really for the whole of Scotland, because there's so much to be gained if we invest in this properly. I mean, for too long, it's been seen as the work of women. It's been seen as the work of underpaid women. And the lack of investment has been woeful. The fact that care workers were having to fight tooth and nail for PPE tells you all you have to know. I mean, there's a 3D printer in my region who, you know, they just stopped doing what they usually do. And like many other little companies, started producing PPE for folk working in care homes. So I very much look forward to the day that we have an inquiry into what went wrong and why it went wrong. And I think, yes, probably having a government minister with a unique responsibility for this sector would be progress. Thank you.
Alison, it would be remiss of me not to say how disappointed we were by Patrick Harvey's comments and the Scottish Greens' failure in the budget to back an interim position of £12 moving to £15. And more than just PPE, we had to threaten strike action to get testing for home carers. That must never, ever, ever happen again. Robert, please.
Yeah, I think just more broadly to start off with, I mean, yeah, definitely if we see that social care is going to be, turned into, a national service, and we're looking at the payments and so on, I can't see how there can't be a minister for social care, to be honest. And but looking more broadly, I was on a call last night with Aileen Campbell, who was sadly losing for the Parliament, who was talking about the report for the Social Renewal Advisory Board, if not now, when. And there's 20 calls for action in there around money and work, people rights, and advancing equality in communities and collective endeavour. And I think a Minister for Social Care, we've already got the linking up at a local level of health and care. And as somebody that's worked in the housing sector for the last 10 years in housing associations, I think it was a missed opportunity probably to have health, social care and housing, much more closely linked. So I think if there's ministers for all these, the key thing is that there's no room for silo thinking on this, and we need to link up across the departments to make sure that the ball's not dropped as we go forward. Because if there's anything that's for sure, we can't go on in a business as usual way when we're planning the recovery now. And that's why I totally welcome. I've been carrying around, if not now, when, like a wee Bible during the campaign, because the statement that I highlighted is that social renewal will not be real unless communities of people, of identity and of place have more say, power and influence, unless we supercharge how we address the structural inequalities that still hold us back as a country. So I would certainly include the overhaul of social care under a minister in that.
Thank you very much, Robert, Jeremy, Jackie and John. And Robert, the point I would make about inequality, economic inequality goes to the heart of this whole debate, both about poverty and also about poverty rates of pay for the predominantly women workforce in care. Jeremy?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to commit to say yes, absolutely, tonight. One, because I'm not going to be First Minister, whatever happens a week on Thursday, and it will be for the First Minister to make the decision. But I think the point you make is absolutely right, that we do need a greater focus in regard to that. And I would say that probably the overwhelming majority of MSPs, actually from all parties, don't understand social care. And I think there needs to be, and I was interested, I think the remark made by somebody just a few minutes ago, is that when we start debating a national care service, we need to hear from those who are at the coalface of this, and it can't simply be a debate which takes place in Parliament from people who don't have that lived experience. And one of the key things that, if I'm fortunate enough to be re-elected, would be make sure that that voice is heard in Parliament, whether it's through a minister or whether it's through a cross-party group or whether it's through other means. we need to make sure that that voice is heard, and what we decide works in practice, because it's all very well having theory and words, but we actually do need to make sure that it will make your life easier and better. So I don't think government, and if I'm honest, I don't think many MSPs are listening. And I think your challenge to us is not just to make us listen at election time, but to listen throughout the next 5 years.
Jeremy, we will be, these fantastic women that represent GMB, predominantly women in care, they're going to make sure you listen, as they were forced to do when people threatened to go on strike to get testing. Jackie, and then John.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you for the question, Liz. I think you've seen a demonstration tonight of it's very easy for politicians to actually come forth with warm words. The difference is you should judge us by our actions. It's certainly the case. We welcomed the £500 payment that was made to staff, but we did point out at the time that, like Wales, the Welsh government, Labour government in Wales, actually gave staff £500 plus the amount of tax that they would have had to pay on top. So actually what they got in their pocket was £500. We encouraged the Scottish government to do likewise. Unfortunately, the SNP, for some reason, said that they couldn't do it. So that was disappointing. As to whether you have a minister or not, let me be blunt about this. We had a minister that was responsible for drugs policy in Scotland. We were told that the eye of the Scottish government was taken off the ball, which is why we had the worst drug death rate in Europe, if not wider than that. So you can have a minister, but actually they have to do the job for them to be of value. So what we would do is say there needs to be, a national outcome. We need to make this matter so that there's national funding, national contracts, and finally, I'm a great believer in, if it matters to you, measure it. Let's actually support the home care sector properly and the care at home sector and, care homes properly. And to do that, it isn't simply about having an additional minister. It's making this a core part of the government. And certainly Scottish Labour would ensure that that happened. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Liz. I think it's a fantastic question, and I think it's something that we should definitely consider. But I must admit that just having a minister doesn't guarantee anything. Like Jackie says, in the last election, the Scottish Liberal Democrats called for a mental health minister, and after the election, we got one. But nothing has improved in the last 5 years for mental health. Like Jackie says, we have a minister for public health and well-being who couldn't answer basic questions on drug deaths in Scotland and had to resign. And it's not like the Scottish government and their health minister wasn't made aware of the problems with care homes. It's that they didn't listen. So we could have a minister and we could have a focal point in Parliament in order to raise the concerns and issues we have. The challenge is making them listen, and the challenge is the accountability. The Scottish government have been very good over the last 14 years at setting targets, but they've been also very good at completely missing them and ignoring evidence and advice where it happens. So I'm not in principle against a minister for social care. I think any other government might or should have one and be very good at it, but whether that would fix the problems we've had right now, I think the evidence points to no. And that we have to find better structures in Parliament for holding the government to account. So I have to commend the work of the GMB and all the social care sector in Scotland for shouting so loudly about the issue. But I think a lot of blame lies with the Scottish government for not listening, and having an extra minister in Parliament wouldn't guarantee that they would listen or that they'd be any better equipped for dealing with the issues in future that we're facing.
Thank you very much, John. Talking about missing targets, the chair has allowed us to run a wee bit over time, but we're on to our final question. It's a really important one. I would just ask those making a contribution if you could be very brief. The final question is from Francis Stojkovic, another home carer from Glasgow, and again a brilliant leader of the Glasgow women's strike. Francis?
Hi there. Hi, thanks Gary. Thanks everyone. My question is it clear from the recent independent review of adult social care that we need radical change in the sector? Workers need to have their work valued and properly rewarded, and we need to review the structures in the sector. Do you support a national care service? And if so, what are your priorities when it comes to delivering it? Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. And I'm sorry to push the panellists. It's Robert, Jeremy, then Jackie.
Yeah, I certainly think that the whole idea about creating a national care service is, well, it's in the SNP manifesto, and what I would want to make me priority, I think that referring back to some of the discussion earlier on, is that that name National Care Service comes with a fair degree of flexibility as to how that service is delivered across Scotland, because, as I've said before, delivering a care package in a city centre or in the suburbs of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen or whatever is very different from delivering care packages across, I think, about 27 inhabited islands in Orkney, with all those travel and accommodation issues that carers encounter. I met a carer when you were allowed to go and stay in B&Bs and things like that, who, as I think I mentioned earlier, was visiting one person on an island because of a gender issue, and then had to move on to another island to do that. So a one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to be suitable for this at all.
Thank you, Robert. Jeremy, it'll be Jackie, John, then Alison.
Thank you for the question. The answer is simply yes and no. I agree actually with what Robert has said completely. The sad thing is that not actually the SNP policy. The SNP policy is to create a centralised system that will work out of Edinburgh or Glasgow and will tell local areas, this is what you've got to do. And that's where it fails for me. Police Scotland, by and large, has not worked for local communities across Scotland. So yes, we need to have national standards, we need to have national priorities, but it needs to be delivered at a local level. And that's where I would disagree with the SNP and with the Greens around this, is that they want to centralise everything into bureaucracy rather than allowing individuals who know the local area to work. So yes, we do need a national service. Yes, it needs to be given much higher priority. And yes, we need to make sure that care is delivered in an equal way, but it doesn't need to be done simply from an office in central Scotland.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jackie?
Yep, much to agree with. Now, I have to say, Scottish Labour proposed a national care service a decade ago. It just goes to show if you wait around long enough, then good ideas are borrowed by whoever is in government. So I welcome the opportunity of having a national care service, but I have to say I agree that we need national standards because we need consistency. We need national funding, so you're not having to cope with cuts in packages at a local level. But we do need local accountability, the opportunity for communities to shape the kind of service that they want, the opportunity for staff working in it to shape the kind of service they know should be delivered. Ultimately as well, it allows for collective bargaining. We should be building at the heart of this career opportunities. But let me get back to basics here. Unless we actually value the workforce, the churn that we continue to see because people find it, it's better in terms of salary to work at Morrison's, Tesco or Asda is ridiculous. So the top priority for me is, yes, let's have that national care service, but let's actually make sure that the staff at the heart of it are properly rewarded and respected. That's what we would make our priority.
Thank you, Jackie. John and Alison.
I think one thing that we could all recognise is the definition of a national care service is not absolute. And whether one party or another would support a national care service depends on that definition. What I would say is that the SNP's model that was put forward to Parliament is one that we do not support as a centralising body that would take up too much bureaucracy and money that could be spent actually creating better services and paying a higher wage for care workers. So in terms of our priorities going forward, we'd like to see better creative bargaining, collective bargaining, in order to get fairer pay for social care workers and better career progression as well. But we'd also like to maintain local accountability away from the centralising body so that those who know best about what's on the front line and at the coalface can feed into it, and we can have a better system across Scotland while maintaining and creating and maintaining national standards. So those are our priorities, and that's why we don't support the model that's been brought to Parliament. But we do certainly support a move to a more uniform approach that makes sure that care workers are fairly paid and have better standards of work and living.
And finally, Alison, thank you, John.
Yeah, we have a national health service. So if you listen to the Lib Dems and the Conservatives there, you'd think there was no recognition at all that the National Health Service responds to local need. You know, we have territorial health boards. We can have a national service that is perfectly flexible and able to respond to local need. We want a national care service built on human rights. We want to end competitive tendering. We support collective bargaining. But the system has to be centred on people, not price. And we too want to protect local decision-making and subsidiarity. And let's start by ensuring that those working in care are paid at least £15 an hour. Let's make sure that they have the best PPE, and that PPE is based on evidence, that they're always first in the queue when it comes to testing, vaccinations, and indeed any impact of long COVID that we might see in the workforce as we go forward. But wholeheartedly support a national care service. It's long overdue.
Thank you very much, Alison. I mean, you know, central to however we structure care going forward has to be funding. There just isn't enough money going into care, full stop. And of course, workers, as long as they're undervalued, we will continue to have an ongoing crisis in care. So we want to see everybody in care, whatever role they play, properly rewarded and valued for what they do. But I apologise, we've run a wee bit over time. Thank you to the hands behind the curtain, those who've done the tech and who've set up tonight. Thank you to our panellists who have been fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time out during this busy election. To all our members who posed the questions, what a job you've done. And of course, thank you to all the carers and all those in support roles in care across Scotland who've been through absolute hell, many of you, over the past year. The union is ultimately the members, and I do want to say special thanks, and I want to recognise the fact that there were so many of our members who had the courage to stand up and speak out about the problems that unfolded, the crisis that unfolded as we've gone through this pandemic. Because if our members hadn't had that courage, if they hadn't spoke out, things would have been even worse than they were. So thank you for that. If you've got colleagues who are not yet in the GMB, get them signed up to GMB Scotland. We are building an army in care. We are going to ensure that carers have the voice that they need in care. And by goodness, we are going to deliver on the £15 an hour. Fight for 15, sign up for GMB Scotland. Thanks again, everyone. Great to see you all. Thanks for your contributions tonight.